Our next speaker will be Coline Zeballos from Roche. She'll be talking about our package validation at Roche.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Ning. And wow, I think I have to say, what a great song we heard. This person must become a composer. That was really great. I think all the comments say so. And thank you to the Orange Pharma Conference for having me. I'm very honored to have been asked to be a featured speaker this year. Validation is so important in our industry, and yet at the same time so feared. So I hope this presentation will be interesting. Let me share my screen. Okay. Hopefully you can see. So, hi everyone. Again, thank you for Orange Pharma for having me with this presentation. I hope to share some optimism around validation, because I'll be presenting the work we've been doing at Roche for around our package validation. And the goal is really that you come out of this presentation with some tangible actions that you can take home for our package validation. So since it's probably the first time you meet me, let me briefly introduce myself. So my name is Coline Zeballos. I'm Swiss and French, based in Switzerland. I consider myself as a quite international person, as I've lived in several countries in my life. As you can see here, I'm actually married to a Bolivian and US citizen, so that only amplified the international, let's say, aspect of my life. For all of those reasons, you can either speak to me in French, English, or Spanish, but don't try anything else, I recommend. My educational background is in business and in data science. I like to say that I use my business and technical experience and background to lead experts in delivering value. I think it goes without saying that technical experts are needed in our industry, but we also need people who can translate our experts' work to and for non-technical stakeholders and usually also decision makers. And that's what I do in my current position as our strategy lead in Pharma at Roche. I drive the IT strategy to support the use of open source programming languages like R and Python. And one of my major contributions recently is around enabling our package validation in the company. And it's some activity that we'll be discussing today. Outside of work, I'm also very much into an extreme sport called kite surfing. It's really a nice sport that makes you travel to find the perfect wind and wave condition. I highly recommend it. So that was it about myself. Don't hesitate to connect with me via LinkedIn or via my Roche email address that will be communicated to you at the end of this presentation. Today we'll be talking about, as I said, our package validation. We'll be first recapping a little bit what validation means and why it's required, because we all ask ourselves, who are those mean people who make our lives harder than it is already with validation? So we'll discover a bit about this. We'll talk also about Roche's approach to validation, what motivates us. We will also see, I'll give you a glimpse of what our internal solution is about and what we do. We'll see how we document validation, and finally, our next steps as a company, but also as an industry. You will see this little icon, the bottom note here says, you'll see an icon across the presentation. This means that there will be content that you'll be able to reuse in your team, particularly in the slide that will have this icon. So let's get us started. I like to build some common understanding on what validation is and why it's required in the first place. We need to remember and take a step back around validation and our development. We need to remember that everything we do is for the patient at the end. There would be no concept of validation, nothing to validate if we didn't have to deliver drugs to patients. And in the molecule pathway or journey to patient that I describe here or show here, that we all know, a pharmaceutical company basically would want to plan a study, collect data, anonymize it, analyze it, and release and create a set of TLGs, the famous tables, listings, and graphs, showing the behavior of the molecule that we found that we want to submit and that we want to launch in the market. We have a big responsibility if we think about it when suggesting a new drug to health authorities. I have some icons of health authorities here. Really, those entities need a way to identify that the new drug we are proposing and that we want to put on the market will actually maximize the value for patients, in other words, cure them, and also minimize secondary effects. That's what we're trying to do, right? So the way health authorities have found to do that, meaning to assess the quality of the drug we're proposing, is to actually ask us to provide, and I will quote here what is shown on the slide, to provide the software program used to create ADAM datasets and generate TLGs with primary and secondary efficacy analysis. And the FDA also explains why they request this information. I quote, to understand the process by which variables were created and to confirm the analysis algorithms. So in short, they want to understand how we obtain our results, right? Which makes sense. The software program, R or SAS, whatever we use to submit outputs to health authorities, should be, as is written here in another regulation, reliable and should document testing procedures. And that's what we call validation at the end. It's the fact of documenting the fact that an R package reliably does what it is meant to do. So each R package will have a specific purpose. We'll need to do something specific, and we'll need to show that it consistently does what it's supposed to do. I think you'll agree that from this perspective, validation makes a lot of sense, and that its final aim, if we always keep this in mind, is to put safe drugs on the market for our patients. And one last note on this slide is that apart from the fact that it is mandatory, validation also brings some advantages. If we validate our software, we also increase code quality, the quality of our code. But we'll come to this in a minute. So now that we are all on the same page, I hope, regarding validation and why we want to have validation activities, I would like to share with you the kind of the principles and the mindset that we've been leaning towards at Roche. If we take a typical software development lifecycle, which applies to our package development, we want to typically define the requirements for that package, so what your package is supposed to do. Develop your package, right? Develop the code so that it actually meets the requirements. You want to create tests to make sure your code does what it's supposed to do, which is here. And finally, then you want to deploy, the package to an environment. And finally, you want to maintain your package, usually so that it can live properly with other packages. You want to manage versions, dependencies, and so on. Now, if we look at what validation expects from us, requirement approval, functional specification, unit testing, traceability matrix, validation report, and so on, we see that the majority of those can be embedded in the development of an R package. Requirements are embedded in the code, same thing for unit testing. We can create a traceability matrix that link those two. And the beauty of the R language is that a lot of information can be extracted from the package itself and automatically populate the evidence of validation, which is this so-called validation report. At Roche, we believe that the key to software validation is to embed validation activities in the software development process and to automate as much as possible in order to have a continuously integrated validation process. And to do so, we lean on public best practices wherever possible. We value direct open source contribution over internal remediation. We also want to give users the freedom to use different validated packages together. And we'll see after, we want to also provide a seamless experience to access those validated packages. And we also want to make no exception when it comes to validating packages, meaning that apart from the core R language that we use, no packages get a free pass. And this is enabled by extensive automation as well. So based on those principles, our team has created an internal tool to automatically check the quality of a specific package, provide feedback to the developer, and to automatically create the validation report when the package passes the validation pipeline. I would like to reuse again our software development lifecycle to show you where our tool helps automation of validation. You will see that our internal solution is a pipeline of tools. This is the first one, but you'll see that each step and each tool, let's say, performs a different step in the R validation process. The number one step actually runs a series of R-specific tests for package quality. So basic tests for generic R build quality are run using R command check, and the package is assessed for test and coverage requirements. There are a number of metadata files that are produced, which can be really helpful resource if you ever want to debug any failing validation criteria. Because actually this step one is meant to be constructive and helpful. It's meant to be to identify package gaps that do not meet our validation expectations, but it also suggests areas of improvement. And the output is designed to be familiar to developers. So, for example, the tool, if the first checks fail, a typical reason for failure would be that the coverage does not meet the threshold we've set. So the tool will tell you this, and then you will be able to rework on the package. You see the little icon, the little light bulb that I shared with you earlier. So here is an example of what you can reuse. Our team has published a package recently on CRAN. It's called CovTracer. It helps automate test traceability. So you can either click to go on the package repository and download the package, or you can also, you can also check the booth in the conference expo after this presentation. The second step in our tool compiles package metadata that we created in step one into a markdown report, while also performing some final quality checks that aren't specific to the R language. And during the execution of this job, the metadata files generated by step one, they are passed on to step two. And we basically do a series of conformance check on the content of these files, and we generate a command line report of any gaps that were identified. Beyond common expectation of our packages, our validation process expects full coverage of the traceability matrix, where all exported objects are documented and evaluated at least by one test. That's important. If step one or two fails, you will get a message for each issue that was discovered. So it's really meant to be very user-friendly and easily actionable. We have also created our solution so that steps 1 and 2 here can be executed by developers, even if they don't intend to formally validate their package. Meaning that even if they don't want to produce the validation report at the end and make the package, let's say, published afterwards to the validated repository for users, a developer could simply run those 2 steps to assess the quality of his or her package while developing. So that's an important point. During a package submission, so step 3, when you actually want to validate your package, the pipeline then includes generating a validation report and publishing the package into a validated repository. That's step 3. As this is a continuously integrated process, these tools serve to really sit close to the development process, right? So that those expectations are kind of a constant consideration throughout the software lifecycle. The advice we actually give to Roche developers is that if a build fails, if you receive an error message, don't be afraid to stop what you're doing, dig into the console, output and rerun the build. So it really ensure that your builds are passing your test before continuing with further development. We will see in a minute what that validation report looks like, but first we'll go to the next step. Once we have our validation report, and we also by definition have our validated package, we want to deploy the package to make it available to users. This is step 4. Our environments are still created in operation right now, so you need to, for a package to succeed in running the validation pipeline, we will still need to, the validated, we will still need it will still need to be validated alongside the rest of the created package library and installations. So that's because the package behavior also depends on the computing environment, the hardware, operating system, other packages that it depends on. So it's important to validate also the context. So to be included in our internal validated package repository, the validation process is to be re-executed in a controlled environment, and it will include some additional steps, like validating against all the production images, for example, or validated environments you have. And there's also a small step that includes the storage of the validation report we produce, because we can't just leave it out there. It needs to be stored in a compliant way. Ideally, we want our deployment to be fully continuous, such that successful builds are automatically published to an internal CRAN-like service for validated packages, or a package manager, which like along those lines. And step 5, finally, consists of having a maintenance team or support team in place to actually help and support the validation process and tool, make sure validated packages are available to users, that there's no package version or dependency conflict. We have not yet covered the documentation side of this process, so I'd like to move on to this. It's a big part of validation, the documentation. So it's an important step that to describe all that we have been through before in the previous slides. In our case at Roche, several validation leads and our internal validation team worked together to create a validation report template, which is circled here by this dotted frame. Basically, the content is here. The most important to highlight here is that the validation report PDF, so this big output, is divided into 3 parts. You have the validation strategy, which is a fixed item. It centralizes many validation requirements that we saw early in the presentation. There's the validation report specific to the R package being validated. And there's the validation registry, which refers to the 3, let's say, one-off documentation that are listed here. So, and here again, there's the little light bulbs, something that we share with you. So we've shared our validation report template in a GitHub action automated pipeline. I invite you to click on the repository and to reuse it. For Roche, it's really important to share this information because we would like to imagine in the future having one unique template used across the industry. That would facilitate health authority understanding of our outputs if we all submit a similar format, right, of documentation. So please pass this message on to your managers or your respective companies that will help. And what's next? I have 1 minute left. What's next? We really want to build a simple ecosystem for users, and I think that should be the objective in all your companies. We want a user to log into his containerized image and from here access non-validated and validated packages. And the user experience should be seamless. Here you can see the internal validation tool. It would automatically push validated packages to a package manager or a CRAN-like repository. Finally, this is my next slide. I show here where we were, where we are, and where we want to be in the future in terms of our processes, tools, and people. Overall, we want to become a manual we come from a pretty manual validation style, and we can now perform partially automated validation, and we want to be fully continuously integrated in our validation activities. The validation tools we're working on use a mix of external teams, a mix of teams, and in the future we want to be fully internalized validation process. There will be a panel discussion this afternoon, by the way, where we will have a mix of Roche, GSK, and Novartis talking about how we can do a common work in the CRAN validation space. I have some acknowledgements. We don't have time, but a big thank you to all the people who participate in the development of such a solution at Roche, and also to the organizing community for inviting me.
Thank you very much. Thank you very